Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about the university sector over the next 4 years with Jeff Selingo. Jeff is editor-at-large at the Chronicle of Higher Education. A 15-year veteran of higher education reporting and editing, Jeff's book, College Unbound, The Future of Higher Education and What It Means for Students, is scheduled to be released in May. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Stephen. Thanks.
Well, thanks again for coming on.
No problem.
Well, Jeff, maybe if you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about, one, what your book is about, since I have not seen it, and then second, how you think that will be somewhat of a guide for the Obama administration in the next 4 years.
Okay. So the book is really looks at the future of higher education, given that the sector and colleges and universities are undergoing massive change right now. Much like the newspaper industry, the music industry, the book industry, which are all in the information delivery business, so are colleges in some ways. And they are being disrupted on every corner by technology and by students who want courses and their education delivered in new and different ways. And so what my book does is it lays out this argument that the colleges of tomorrow are not the same colleges that the parents who are going to be sending their kids there that they went to 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so it lays out this vision of an unbundled future where students are getting their degrees kind of on their terms, on their time, transferring among providers and among institutions. And hopefully they actually complete a degree, because many students now don't complete a degree. They go to college but don't complete a degree. And hopefully it will be cheaper than it is today. And so I think that many of the arguments and institutions and programs and technologies that are profiled in the book are all things that the Obama administration is thinking about as they think about their policies for the next 4 years.
Well, in terms of the next 4 years, do you think that the issue of college costs is going to be addressed?
Well, it seems like every president, at least in the last 3 or 4 administrations, has tried to address college costs. You know, I started reporting at the Chronicle in the late 1990s when the Clinton administration set up a college cost commission that was looking at the issue of rising college costs. During the George W. Bush administration, they had the Spellings Commission, which a big piece of that was looking at college costs. President Obama, in the last State of the Union address, warned colleges about rising college costs. So to be honest with you, no. I think there will be attempts, but the fact of the matter is that colleges are independent players. There is a market at play here, and I think it's not the government that can control college costs. I think it's the market that can control college costs. And at a time when the time comes when parents and students say, we don't think a degree from this particular institution is worth $40 or $50 or $60,000 or whatever it is, that is the time, I think, when college costs will begin to come down.
But don't you think that that's happening at some universities?
It is
now?
Definitely happening at some universities. I mean, the pricing power of universities is less than it ever has been before. And so universities are looking for ways to reduce the increases in their tuition. And the fact of the matter is that parents and students can't pay what they used to be able to pay. I mean, parents don't have access to their home equity like they used to because of the housing bust. Recently saw news that 1 in 4 Americans now dip into their 401ks in order to just pay for day-to-day living expenses. Family wealth right now is at the level it was in the early 1990s. Of course, college tuition is not at the level it was in the early 1990s. And I think that there's a big disconnect between those two things. But then
why can't the government do anything then?
Well, the main government lever, I think, is on student aid. And right now, the floodgates of student aid is open to any institution as long as they can meet some minimal standards. And I really think those are minimal standards. So where the government can do something, I don't think it can put price controls on. We've tried that now a couple of times, and it hasn't worked. First of all, it's impossible to get through Congress. And secondly, there's a lot of arguments against price controls. But where I think the best government lever is on financial aid. 90% of a college's budget, take out Harvard and all the big time colleges, right, the elite colleges. But 90% of a common college's budget is subsidized by state or federal government in some way. That's a lot of public subsidies going to these institutions. If you take away some of those subsidies, colleges are going to be forced to deal with the cost issue. And that's where I think the government should focus on. Let's put our financial aid dollars where they're most and best used.
Well, but let's get to the issue of debt. I mean, in today, rather than just in the future. I mean, right now, if I understand this correctly, there is more credit card debt, there's more student debt than credit card debt in the United States.
True. Surpassed the $1 trillion mark. And I think that sometimes the media tends to overplay some of these stories on debt. You know, the average student debt now, undergraduate student debt, is about $25,000. To be honest with you, that's pretty reasonable, right? You know, I think the average bachelor's degree recipient, the average salary is around $30-something thousand. So, you know, we always, I think, should keep the debt ratio around the first year's salary. $25,000, you know, kind of the price of a new car. I think where it becomes really problematic is when the debt levels start increasing above $40,000 and $50,000 and $60,000. And these students are getting degrees from institutions, to be honest with you, are not really providing them much in the marketplace. And thus they're not getting good jobs. They're perhaps going back to jobs that they don't even need a college degree for. And then they're getting into trouble in paying their student loans.
Which I find really interesting because while this is all going on, more and more universities are recruiting more and more students overseas to come to U.S. universities.
They need the money. I mean, right now, most colleges are looking in every corner of the world, literally, for students who can pay. The well, as I talk about in my book, the well of what I call full-paying students is drying up, especially in the U.S. You know, kind of the domestic market of students whose parents can afford to write a $50,000 check every year is really drying up. And so what institutions are doing is twofold. Public institutions are looking out of state. Because out-of-state students pay more. The out-of-state tuition is still usually less than a private college. And so, for example, Oregon and Washington State enroll more California residents than do 6 California State University campuses in total. So that's where they're going. But I think that's going to dry up. And then the other place they're going is overseas. You know, at a place like the University of Delaware, which I talk about in my book, you know, 600 members of the freshman class are from China. That's up from 2 students just 3 years ago. And mainly that's because these students can afford to pay. They want to come to get an American education. And most of all, they can afford to pay the full price. Now, college and university presidents, if they were sitting here, they will talk about, you know, the diversity of experience, the cross-cultural experiences. Somewhat true, but mostly they're going for the money.
Well, and you raised the issue before of what a student was like, a student experience was like or will be like relative to their parents. If you were a student at the University of Delaware 20 years ago, I assume that that's a very different experience than today's University of Delaware.
No doubt about it. I mean, you know, at many public universities, first of all, you're not going to come in at 18 and spend 4 years there and graduate with a degree. That's less and less likely, you know, just a little over 50% of students actually do that. You know, so students are stopping out, sometimes because of money. They're transferring institutions now. 1/3 of students transfer institutions before they earn a bachelor's degree. That's much higher than it's ever been before. They're having trouble getting classes because of cutbacks in state funding, so there's fewer courses being offered, and so students can't get it. And then there's the technology aspect. I mean, students, and colleges have not necessarily been keeping up with this, right? But students today come to campus with much different expectations than I even did less than 20 years ago. I mean, they're coming with all of these technology tools, and they learn in a collaborative environment now. They're always working with other people online, via text, via phone, via the internet, whatever. And then, then they come to this college campus, which is still trying to teach them in a very traditional way. We tend to really romanticize, I think, what happens on a traditional college campus. The ivy on the walls, the fall football weekends, all that stuff. And I think we think that that's the way learning and teaching should be delivered these days. But the students coming today have much different expectations, and that's why many of them are not satisfied.
Well, and assuming that they're not satisfied, it seems that this is rife for something to happen,
yes.
Right? Because if Professor Jones and Professor Smith is saying, you know, we're going to teach the class the same way we always did, and football weekend is important.
Yep.
And a student saying, well, that's nice, but I'm taking out $50,000 worth of debt. I want to get the information on my cell phone, and I'd like to get a job. What happens?
Well, I think the biggest problem I see with American colleges and universities and the students coming in the pipeline is bad match, right? I met so many students who had either no idea why they were in college or had no idea why they were necessarily at this college, besides a friend told them, a family member encouraged them to go there. You know, colleges and universities know so much more about the people applying to their schools, and the people applying to those schools know so little about the institution. We really have an information deficit, I think. You know, we're actually overloaded in some ways with information about colleges, but students are not being matched up with the right institutions. And this is one area where I'll give credit to the Obama administration in trying to give out information to students about what am I paying for? And you know, and we still don't really have a good quality measure of colleges, right? You know, we have the U.S. News rankings, but beyond that, we really have no idea what makes college A better than college B. It's kind of this gut feeling in the minds of students. It's a very emotional decision. It's not, in some ways, a very logical decision. And I think that is where I think the biggest potential for disruption happens in the future, because now with all this data and the power of big data and algorithms and everything else, I think there's a lot of potential in the next couple of years to help students better choose the institutions that they're going to match them up with institutions where they're going to succeed.
But you know, when I'm not hosting this show, I'm helping students with this exact process. And I think you're exactly right that students have a very vague notion of some schools that they're interested in, but those notions are based on things that may not necessarily be true anymore. It may be true based on something 30 years ago. It may be true based on just a general feeling that Georgetown University is a nice school, or the University of Denver is a nice school. And how do we know that that's true? And
we don't, right? And so they end up going to some of these places because their family members went there or their friends are going there. We do a very poor job of kind of seeing what we really know about this student, perhaps going all the way back to 6th grade, and what we really know about this institution and what students like me have done there, right? And that's where I think in the next couple of years, if the data scientists are right, where I think we could potentially better match students, right? We know so much more about these students going back to their earliest time in elementary and middle school. And we know better now, and I think even better in the future, what types of students succeed at what types of schools. You know, so take, for example, graduation rates, right? We talk a lot about graduation rates at American colleges and universities, somewhat of a flawed measure, but I always tell students, ask what the graduation rate is for people like you. What is it? Because there's big differences between men and women, for example. Big differences between race and ethnicity. Ask, you know, first-generation students as opposed to students whose parents have college degrees. Ask for more specific information. When all this data is presented to you, say, oh, that's all fine. These averages are all fine and good, but what is it for a student like me? Because that, in the end, that's what matters in terms of whether that student is going to succeed.
But no one ever wants to believe that they're not going to succeed. And they never believe that they're the person who's not going to be in the top 10% of the class.
Well, and this is somewhat of a problem. I address this issue in my book, is that I think that post-secondary education is incredibly important, right? We know the economy is changing in a way that further education after high school is 100% necessary. I'm not sure it's necessary right at 18. I think in some ways we're sending way too many students to college at 18 and setting them up for failure. And what I would love us to see, because right now you graduate from high school, you have essentially 3 options. You have college, you have the military, and you have work. And by the way, the work is, you know, kind of menial work because you only have a high school diploma. I would love to see us create more pathways to college that maybe allow people to delay college for a year or 2 years or 3 years while they gain real experiences working with adults. Maybe they learn some new skills. They learn a little bit about themselves and get a sense of what they really want to do in life. Maybe they earn some credit, and maybe they earn some money to pay for college. But I think what it would help is those students who really don't know what they quite want to do, and they just end up as college as a warehouse, you know, somewhere to sit for a couple of years. I think that's what we need more than anything.
Well, do any countries do that particularly well?
A lot of countries do that particularly well. Europe is, you know, Germany has a great a system of apprenticeships that allows students to learn a skill and a trade. In Great Britain, they have, of course, the famous gap year. In Australia, I think they also have the gap year. So there's other countries that do this very well. Now, one downside of those countries is they track students very closely, right? And they tell students, well, you're not college-going material, so you're going to become a plumber or whatever, right? And one of the great things that I've heard in my travels over the last year and a half in researching this book is that students, a lot of actually students come from overseas to go to American universities because they want to experience a more broad education than just what they're being tracked into doing. And that's one reason they come to the US. I think we can keep both elements. I actually think that colleges actually can design a system where they allow students that there's more of a blending between high school and college. You know, right now, you graduate high school in June in a very structured environment, and 3 months later, you're thrown onto a college campus, fairly free. Usually your parents are not around. You have to kind of decide your own course schedule, your own studying, and we expect them to succeed. I think there's a little bit more we can do to have more of a structured program in between high school and college.
But I keep getting back to this issue of political pressure. If let's assume all of this is true, then why aren't more people pressuring the government to helping or gently guiding universities to providing some of this thinking that you're talking about?
Because it's fear of something different, right? I mean, this is our image of college in this country is 4 years, and it's after high school, right? So, by the way, and that image, as you and I both know, is not reality anymore, right? The traditional student today is actually an adult student returning to school. It's not the 18 to 24-year-old. So I think a little bit is about tradition in this country, and it's kind of changing that traditional model. I think that colleges are also afraid, right? Well, they're in the business of getting students in seats, right? And if suddenly they create a pathway that allows students to explore a little bit, one of the things they might decide is, A, I want to go to a different college. I want to major in something else. Or I might want to go and go into the workforce for a couple of years. And then they lose that student. And so in some ways, it's not in the best interest of the institution.
That's a fair point. In terms of best interest of institutions, one of the things that's intrigued me over the years is the issue of FERPA.
Yep.
And what's secret information and what's not secret information. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, FERPA, which is the Student Privacy Act, which I think was passed in maybe the early 1970s. FERPA is an interesting concept to me today because colleges work very hard to withhold information always under the guise of FERPA because they want to protect students' privacy. What's interesting to me is that students don't have a lot of expectations about their privacy today. And in fact, they're the least private people that I know. They share everything on Twitter and Facebook and other social media. They're always telling people what they're doing, where they're doing it. But yet colleges really push the government to strengthen FERPA. And it's really, I think, not in the interest of the students. It's in the interest of the institution. That less information, the less amount of information that colleges have to give to consumers, the better off colleges are, right? Because they're kind of hiding behind all these numbers that would really show, I think, how well students are doing or what students are doing.
Well, but let's say I wanted to buy a new car. You mentioned a new car before, right? Let's say I wanted to buy a new car. I could research whether or not car X was better than car Y in a whole bunch of ways.
You can't do that in higher ed. It's really amazing, right? So when you go buy a car, you have your consumer reports, which have tested these on a number of different measures. You could go to the Kelley Blue Book, by the way, and find out what the resale value of that car is going to be. Oh, and by the way, when you go buy a car or you buy a house, the forms that whether you go to the Chrysler dealer or the Lexus dealer, the forms that you fill out to take out a car loan, or whether you go to Wells Fargo or Bank of America, the forms are all the same. And this is another thing in higher ed. When you get your financial aid delivered by the institution and you're a student trying to decide where to go, the offer from institution A it looks different and feels different than institution B, than institution C. They're all different. You have no idea, really, in some ways. In some ways, it's like a foreign language trying to interpret these financial aid offers. This is one area where, again, the Obama administration is trying to push to have kind of a common template for these financial aid forms, another regulation that the colleges are fighting. Because in some ways, these financial aid forms are written by marketers in order to convince you and I, or the parents and students who are not savvy consumers, to go there.
Right. Well, what about Congress? Is there a kind of place where the Obama administration and Congress can work together? Is this one of these areas where maybe there's some commonality of interest?
I think there is. In some ways, the administration is fairly conservative on higher education. This whole movement towards accountability, this is kind of more of a mantra of conservatives. And the Obama administration really wants higher education to be more accountable. So I think that there are some commonalities on this front. Now, we tried this a couple of years ago with the Spellings Commission report when Margaret Spellings was Secretary of Education, and we didn't get very far. And we were able to get a lot of its recommendations done through the state houses and through some regulations, but not through law. So I'm still skeptical, and also the Education Department's going to be kind of busy with the K through 12 issues and No Child Left Behind, so we'll see.
If I remember the Spellings Commission final report correctly, didn't someone on the commission refused to sign that? Who was that?
David Ward, who was at that time was president of ACE, which is the umbrella group which oversees all of higher education. Essentially, it's the lobbying group for higher education institutions. Resistant to change is what I say about most higher education associations. They, and it's true of associations in any industry in America, right? If you have a good thing going, you want to keep it going for a long time.
Fair enough. In terms of American students going somewhere else, let's assume that somebody's watching this and says, well, this is crazy. I'm spending all this money. I don't know what I'm getting for my money. Why don't I just go to Canada or the UK for my degree?
It's options, right? Not many people do that. It's hard because the American higher education system, despite all its problems, is still considered the best in the world. And I would still hold it up. I would still hold the top of the American higher education system as the best in the world. I'm not quite sure the middle and the bottom, especially not the bottom, are not the best in the world anymore. But I think that, again, we have this romantic vision of higher education in our minds, and that we don't when we imagine sending our son and daughter away to college, we don't imagine sending them. Yeah, we send them overseas, for a study abroad semester, but we don't send them over there to go to school, because why would we want to send somebody to another country when everybody else wants to come here for the American brand of higher education? But in some cases, it could be cheaper, especially in Canada.
Fair enough. Well, you keep raising the issue of romance, which is an interesting notion, where we have a romantic vision of something, but it may not necessarily match the current reality, if I hear you saying this correctly.
There's no doubt about it, right? So, we think that, again, we think of, our the professor in the nice co-teaching in front of us, lecturing in front of a small class. Doesn't happen, right? 70% of, so just one example of our romantic vision of colleges, 70% of faculty members today are off the tenure track. They're not going to be tenured faculty members. Many of them are part-timers. So they come on they rush onto campus, they teach a class, they rush off of campus. In some cases, these are great professors, right? Because they're probably working in the business that they're teaching, and it brings real-world reality into the classroom. But in many cases, especially in the humanities, they're working from institution to institution. They don't get to know the students. They don't have offices on campus. And to be honest with you, they're exploited labor. In many cases, they're being paid, $2,000 for a course that the university is probably bringing in well into the six figures on. And all that extra money is going to subsidize other things on college campuses. But this idea that students they're paying all this money to be taught by the best people in the field is no longer true.
And what about the MOOCs then?
The current fascination in American higher education. Yes, the MOOCs. So these massively online open courses, which in some cases enroll 100,000+ students. I think there's a role for them. I don't think they're the answer. First of all, we've taught online for a long time, and we've taught massive amounts of students for a long time. And in fact, in some ways, on college campuses, when people teach to 200 students, we think that's a terrible lecture class. But yet online, when somebody teaches to 100,000 students, we say it's the future, right? I think MOOCs play an important role in what I think is the future of higher ed, is in hybrid education, where there is a physical presence, where there is a professor, but a lot of what I would call the low touch work, the low level work, watching lectures, trying to understand concepts, can be done offline and out of class, or actually online and out of class. And that's where and then the in-class experience, where they meet fewer times, is focused on coaching the student and helping them through problems.
Fair enough. We only have a few more minutes. I guess I wanted to ask you to just some general advice. If you're a student watching this today, what do you want a student to be focused on when he or she is thinking about where they want to go to school?
Well, I think they need to figure out what they really want to do, right? And what are the types of experiences that they want? I don't think everybody has to have a major before they go to college and know exactly what they want to do, but what are the types of experiences that they want? But I think that they need to ask much better questions of the institutions they're considering. You know, when you go on these college tours, which I've been on a lot over in the last year, I mean, they want to show you all the bells and whistles. Some parents ask, I think, pretty good questions, but most of the time they're not asking the right questions. They're not asking about what are your course transfer policies, because what if I transfer? You know, and how am I going to be able to transfer these credits? They don't ask about who's going to be teaching my kids. They don't ask about graduation rates. They don't ask about debt issues. There's a lot of issues that parents and students just don't think about. They think about all the bells and whistles that colleges are showing them on these tours.
But how is a 17-year-old or a mom or a dad who's not in the higher education sector supposed to think about those issues?
It's hard. I mean, right, because you know we do this every day, right? And I still have a hard time trying to figure out what's the difference between college A and B. I think giving people better and more information is key, but I think giving it at the time when they need it. So we tend to overload parents and students with all these guidebooks and everything else at the beginning of the college search process. There's certain number of questions they need to ask at the beginning of the process, a different set of questions in the middle of the process, and then when they're trying to decide between school A and B, there's a different set of questions. And I think laying those out, and I think this is where the government can play a role in consumer information. I think laying those out in that way so that students or parents are not just bombarded with information, but that they're given to it in easy chunks to digest and ask of colleges, I think is really what's key.
And should those chunks be online? Should those chunks be by student advisors? How do you see those chunks?
I think some of it's online. I actually have a pretty dim view, to be honest with you, of counseling, of high school counseling in the U.S. I mean, just because they're overloaded, right, with students, right? I can't remember what the latest figure is, but it's like one counselor for every couple hundred students, right? They just don't have the time, and I think that having an unbiased government resource that can help walk parents and students through this process year by year, month by month when you get to the junior and senior year, and using data to help match students up with institutions is, I think, the best way to the future.
Well, and I think at that, we're going to have to leave it at that. So, Jeff, thank you very much.
No problem. Great to be here.
If you would like additional information about Jeff Selingo, please visit chronicle.com or jeffselingo.com. If you have comments or suggestions about Higher Education Today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.